Welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. This is September 2025, and on September 10th is World Suicide Day. I know it's already passed, but their theme was create hope through action. I was reading a little bit before starting today. I was reading about the semicolon and how what symbolizes in mental health. I thought it was intriguing. A lot of times, the meaning of semicolons in a sentence is that it's a punctuation mark that used to connect two independent clauses in a sentence. In the context in mental health, as authors, that you choose not to end the sentence or your life. I just thought it was a little. It's called Project Semicolon. I just thought it was intriguing. I haven't read entirely what they do, but I just feel when we're talking about suicide, I just love to kind of see other projects and other agencies just trying to spread the word of prevention. Another on the same line, in the States is Recovery Month, and they're restoring every aspect of life. I guess it's regard to holistic, how we look at recovery and mental health and everything else, dual diagnosis. And in last few years, we've been one more day for this month, just because I feel as a suicide attempt survivor, it's that one more day I think is very important to remember. And having said that, today we have a returning guest. His name is Dr. Reshie. Joseph, thank you so much for coming on and just sharing your input.
Thank you for having me back on your podcast, Robert. It's been we've done a few together now, haven't we?
I know we have, and I do really appreciate your our conversations. I'll say that much.
Well, it's a pleasure to be back, Robert. Pleasure to be back.
A short disclaimer: in the States, 988 is our suicide crisis lifeline. I did put in my website list, obviously, of some of the crisis lifelines around the world. I don't know how updated they are, but however, I do want to encourage you, if you are in crisis, find out where you are, what crisis numbers that may be there, or whatever support you can get. With that being said, we're going to start off with an author I used to read when I was in, I would say, primary or elementary in the States, Mark Twain. He says it this way: a man cannot be comfortable without his own approval. We'll start there. What comes to mind, Reshie, when you hear this quote?
Well, to begin with, I've spoken to you a number of times now, and I didn't know that you were yourself a survivor of a suicide attempt.
Yeah. So, it's something that, I think through trauma therapy that I've been going through, it's just hard for me, but I feel confident more. I guess I feel more. I think I've been through all the trauma that I feel comfortable enough to share it. Obviously, not the details, whatever, of my comfort level, but I think it's important that people know that there is more, and it may not feel like. That's why one more day really means a lot to me, because at the time I didn't think there was. So at the same time, it's just, if I could be that kind of encouragement, and those who are survivors, or those not to minimize or trying to compare, but I just feel more confident in sharing that now. So that's all.
Well, thank you for sharing that with me. It reminds me very much that when I go about my daily business, when I go about my daily routine, and I come up against people in all different walks of life, to treat people with a degree of kindness and consideration, for one simply does not know what that person may or may not be going through. Mm-hmm. You know how we bump against people all the time in daily life, on the bus, on the tram, on the coach, in cafes, in restaurants. We're just coming up against people all of the time, and it's so easy, and I'm certainly very guilty of this, to get very caught up in the moment. Oh, this person isn't serving me quick enough, or that person spoke to me with a slight irritable tone, or just something about that person that rubs me up the wrong way. And it's very easy to be unkind and to be nasty.
Yeah.
And a conversation like this is so valuable because it reminds me I don't know what that person could be going through in that moment. And
Mm-hmm.
stop and to think, there may be more happening here than meets the eye. So thank you for that,
Yeah.
Robert. This quote, a man cannot be comfortable without his own approval. Very interesting one. I think it's true. Certainly, what we know from much of the literature on this, or what I know, that there are forces within the individual that are very much part of the whole depression matrix, if you like, or the suicide matrix. A very interesting example of the tension within individuals comes from the Japanese. The Japanese have a very interesting condition known as the hikikomori. I don't know if you've ever heard of this.
I've heard of it. I think you actually mentioned it last time briefly, if I remember.
I may have done. I find this condition fascinating because it's a form of social suicide, but not actual physical suicide. The Japanese are a very interesting group of individuals with regards to suicide because they have the whole tradition of seppuku. Suicide is part and parcel of their noble tradition, if you like. If you lose a battle, you commit ritualistic suicide, certainly in the past that you did. But what is interesting about the hikikomori is the person doesn't commit physical suicide, but they commit ritual, or rather social suicide. They withdraw from the world. They shut themselves in. I believe hikikomori if translated, means to be shut in, to exclude oneself from the world. And the most interesting explanation I've heard of this is that there is a conflict within the person. The Japanese believe that there are two faces that we show the world. The persona, or what they call the tatamai, the face that we present to the world, and the hone, which is the face that one presents within the safety of one's home. And when the tension between these two faces, the public face and the private face, is so great, the person basically snaps, and suicide is a result. So if this quote is true, then the ability to sit with and resolve this particular conflict between the parts within oneself, the public face, the persona, the superego, if we want to use Freud, the idealized version of ourselves that we want society to believe, and the view that we have of ourselves in our private moments when we look in the bathroom mirror, that if the tension between those two forces are too great, then one is not able to, as Twain says, to approve of oneself. If I don't look in the mirror and see someone looking back at me that I approve of, then that tension becomes too great, it snaps, and what you end up with is a person who simply can't face the world, either in a ritual sense or in an actual sense. That would be my perspective.
And I feel maybe I'm saying it simplistically, but self-worth kind of are the undertones here. Is that a lot of times working with clients, I would say, are you allowed to get better? It sounds weird to say it that way, or even better yet, are you allowed the time to get better? Because there's always this urgency to get it done quickly. And also, there's a comedian I liked one of his stand-ups. It was John Mulaney. He said he was a mayor of nothing. So I try to encourage my clients not to be the mayor of nothing, because it is really hard. There's so much over explaining. There's just so many barriers, and it's not. Yeah, obviously, some the healthcare system in the States with insurance and all that stuff can be barriers and stuff, but there's just barriers. Period. Everywhere. Like the stigma, a lot of times we look at it like externally, but it's more internally. A lot of times it's like, am I good enough to get allowed to care? Am I good enough to kind of explore what avenues I can take to better what I'm going through. And shocking enough, I sometimes think those areas when I'm working with people is a little bit more gray. They know what they should be feeling. They know what they think society. Oh yeah, I should be. I want to get better, but if it's going to make me look bad, if it's going to take longer than it should take, and these generalized statements, I feel there's a conflict. Just like what Mark Twain's saying, like you're never going to be satisfied because you're kind of trying to appease both sides. You talk about the persona, and the hardest mirror to look at is yourself when you're kind of in that imbalance. If that makes sense.
Very much so. And I think there's a real danger in the matrix that you describe. If we used a very basic diagram or a basic concept of self-worth or self-esteem as having three equal parts, rather like Beck's cognitive triad, right? The view that we have of ourselves, the view that we have, the beliefs, the core beliefs about the world and other people, and the beliefs that we have about the future, whether it's bleak or whether it's bright. Then the real danger, as you describe it, is if all of my efforts are centered around gaining the approval of other people, which I then use to reverse engineer an approval of myself, then my sense of worth is entirely dependent on the well wishes of others, because I'm reverse engineering my self-worth using that. Eventually we all come up against this quote where we will fall afoul of that. If you've lived long enough, this is almost a certainty. You will get to the point where I experienced this just a few years ago when I went through a divorce, and suddenly plenty of people who thought very highly of me and approved of me a great deal suddenly just didn't want to know me. They just disappeared. And suddenly my approval ratings, if you like, just plummeted, right? I went from 5-star to 1-star overnight, it seemed. And once that disappears, then the ability to use the well wishes and the approval of other people and then reverse engineer that into approval of myself, that just disappeared along with that. And then you're really left with the question, now that no one approves of me, how much is my approval of myself actually worth? And I was very startled to discover not a lot.
And I remember some of the most basic monumental, I guess, understandings I've learned was that, we have, I don't know if it was just me, but I always had this fictional idea that if people understood exactly what I went through, then they would care. Like they would understand and they would care. Like it was like an equation. And I realized it didn't really work because I could explain as much as I could, but I never was really satisfied of the interpretation. Like, and they're really trying. It's easier to laugh now, but what I learned was people don't have to understand every little intricate detail of what you've been through to support you. And it's weird to say it that way, but with mental health, it's so, or even substance use, all the ones that are really stigmatized, is almost that's the case. You're constantly pleading to be worthy enough to get help and feel that you deserve that help. And it's like this ongoing thing. If you don't have, at least my experience, if I don't feel that, if I felt to this day that I still need to explain, I probably wouldn't be where I'm at right now. It was a huge barrier. It's so simple to think, oh, yeah, of course, no one. But when you're in it, you're not going to really feel that way. You're going to feel like I need to explain everything so this makes sense for them, because that's how it works. But I don't know if that makes any sense. But it just, those simple little steps was monumental for me, along with others, of course. That was just one example. So.
I recently did a video with one of my co-workers in my organization. I would say the woman who's my closest collaborator, has been for a long time, Alexis. We just recently did a video together. And in that, she rather interestingly defined trauma as a problem of narrative. And then she goes into it, and she just said it very beautifully, far more beautifully than I can, but she echoed what you said so many times. The difficulty is not that we suffer with what we suffer. but that we are unable to put it into words. We are unable to explain it to ourselves or to other people in a coherent narrative. The narrative is very fractured. There's no story. There's no, this is the reason why this has happened and why I feel this way. The person is unable to do that, and how that really takes and amplifies an already difficult situation.
Yeah, there's this quote from Carl Jung. I like. He says, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." I find that a lot of the verbiage at first when I was reading a bit of Carl Jung it was hard for me to grasp, be honest. Every single, but he had to name it something of what he was describing. But I do find that there's a lot of when I looked past the verbiage, I actually gained a lot from Carl Jung and what his approach and how he saw self, how he saw the whole conflict from within. And when I think about this month and at least this year, I'm really thinking about, because it feels like an invisible barrier is the self-worth factor. Because I could, there's always that you could bring a horse to water, but if they won't drink, you can't force them. But I feel with mental health, it's not that basic. It's a lot of times the barriers or people who are feeling like there's no way out. I feel like I'm experiencing barriers of, you have the tangible needs. Yeah. Squared away. You have family support. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter all that, because if the individual doesn't feel that they're worth getting better, it's kind of very difficult, because a lot of times I've seen just setback after setback, barriers after barriers, and then how can I say it this way? Discourse or even toxic habits that are familiar become more enticing, because the outside, the unknown, becomes more unbearable, especially in these kind of settings. So I don't know if that makes sense. And what do you think about this quote from Carl Jung?
Well, as someone who has multiple toxic habits myself, I can't recommend them highly enough. Terrific fun. No, just just kidding. Where would a conversation like this be without a quote from Jung? A beautiful one as well. Again, this relates to the parts theory that I started with in terms of the Japanese and the hikikomori and all that. The one from Jung, which I personally think is superior to the one from Freud, is his division of us into the persona, the face that we show the world, the shadow, which to a degree translates to or transmogrifies to Freud's id. It's the dark, repressed, inhibited impulses of ourself, the part of us that wants to kill and wants to rape and wants to torture and all of that business. And then there is the ego, which is the balancing force between these two. And then there is the self, which is the combination of this triad of forces. Very early on in the divorce process that I went through, I was in therapy, and one day I turned up at a session, and it was at a difficult time. So it wasn't really, I think there was some frustration on both sides. And in just a brilliant move, a brilliant moment, my therapist said to me, "Why are you here, Resh? Why are you here? What are you here to achieve? What are you here to do?" And I just went into some scientific spiel about the brain and blah, blah, blah. And she just cut me off and said, "Nope, that's not why you're here. You are here, Reshie, to take the measure of your own vileness." That's a statement that's really stuck with me, because yes, there is the persona, it's very clearly visible here. We present ourselves in a certain way, we dress in a certain way, but there is always the shadow that's kept locked away, that's kept hidden, that wants to run amok and engage in all of those, as you rather charmingly describe them, toxic habits. It's like we can pretend they're not there, or we can admit that they are, and we can take their measure. So when I look at this quote, when I think about looking inside in the Jungian way, it's really the willingness to look at the parts of myself that are the most vile,
Mm.
the most disgusting, and the bits that stay very, very well hidden, but are definitely there exerting a force, if you like.
Yeah, I think for when it comes to um actually truly seeing yourself, it's very uncomfortable. I remember working with a therapist on just truly mindfulness and some of the things that I've been through, and it's hard, and some of the things that maybe I'm not so proud of. And what I learned was, he's like, oh, whatever that is, whatever that event, show no judgment, and actually get to the point where you actually like give direct love towards that or direct something positive. I'm like, how do I do this? This is a very toxic or very bad part of my life. But the thing about it, it is still me. It is part of me. It's not who I maybe not choose to be now, because it's kind of like I can imagine illustration. We're stuck there at those moments in our lives, and if we're stuck there, I found that when I was, it's not that I agree with the behavior or what I did. It's just I accepting the wholeness of who I was and who I am. And that wholeness, that balance is really where I felt lighter. It's not like anything I changed. I accepted more of who I was and who I want to become. I think, and at a simple, I guess I'm paraphrasing Jung, is loneliness. I mentioned this prior, but in other episodes, but is really the inability to not share what's important to you. Like, if you're not able to share what's important to you, I know Jung says it more eloquently, then it just feels like compounded that you don't have anyone, and loneliness seems heavier. So if I've seen this even when I'm talking with individuals, which I don't have any tangible resources. I'm trying to help them, but I hear them. I hear what they're going through. I hear, and they say thank you. I'm like, I did nothing, and they say thank you because the whole world is not listening to them. The whole world saying what they should or should not do, what they could have done differently. But finally, someone actually listens to what's important to them, even though it may not be right on the mark. They're getting there, and I feel that that's something that I learned looking at working in the mental health field, but also in my own life. So I don't know if that kind of makes a little bit of sense.
Well, I see that you've succumbed to the therapy du jour and de rigueur, the IFS. The bit where you went, there are no bad parts. That's a very IFS way of looking at things. I like the IFS system. I'm not trained in it myself. I have a colleague that is. We have endless conversations about it. But the advancement I think that Richard Schwartz has made. Look, parts theory is nothing new. It goes as far back as Plato, really, who described the human mind as two horses being ridden by a charioteer, where one horse is the emotional brain and the other horse is the instinctual part of us, and the charioteer is the rational, logical mind. So the idea that the human being is divided into parts is certainly not a novel concept or not a new one. But where I think Richard Schwartz's system is a refinement on both Freud and Jung and the others is precisely what you've just said, that there are no bad parts. You can label them firefighters, as he does, and managers and exiles. But really, it's the ability to invite each of these parts into the dialogue, into the conversation, to be able to treat each of these parts, even the parts of us that we flinch at. And usually they're firefighters, the ones that come in and stomp all over situations and leave us feeling a little bit chagrined and ashamed, even those parts, to be able to invite them and to treat them with kindness and due regard, that is a real strength and a real skill and a real advancement. And I certainly hear, I don't know if you're an IFS person, but I hear it in your language. I thought I'd mention it.
Yeah. Ongoing. It's always ongoing. You're never really there, but I do try to, it's not easy, and it's not like it's easier said than done. And I want to ask you, there's two questions I think I asked myself. I working in the field, I asked my clients. So I want to ask you this question, and you could take it any angle. When did having an illness, I was just going to say illness, we're not going to talk about whether it's mental health, and struggle become, I guess, grammar wise, sorry about that, become the mirror that defines our worth? When did, like, having an illness, having something that is an impairment, become the mirror that defines whether we're worthy? Because obviously we see someone physically impaired with a birth defect, we seem to be more, at least externally, more understanding and more empathetic. But when did having an illness, this is, I guess, an internal dialogue, when did me, let's say, having depression or me having trauma become the true mirror that defines my worth, or in that regard? So as a retrospective, or what do you say when you hear this kind of questioning? What comes to mind? Sorry for the grammar issues, but anything that comes out of it?
For me, it is those moments in my life where I've completely torched my life, where I've completely burnt things to the ground. So when I torched my medical career, that would be one moment. When I torched my marriage, that would be another one. So there are certain. I have a tattoo on my arm that is a representation of the dance of Shiva. Shiva is a Hindu god, and in the Hindu universe, Shiva is depicted as both the creator and the destroyer of the world. And if you look at the image of Shiva, he is creating and he is destroying the world at the same time. So above his head there is a creation, and then you can see his feet stomping on this turtle. So what it signifies is that in any moment of creation, in the precise moment that creation is occurring, is also the seeds of his destruction. So the very day that we're born as human beings, on that very day, the date that we're going to die is also written. Yeah. When you build a house, when you create anything, at the very moment you create something, the seeds of that destruction is also sown into it. And I've often felt that that's really the mirror that defines me, that whenever I've created anything beautiful, I'm in the process of creating at the moment. I went through a period of destruction, and I'm in the process of building and creating, which if I'm given a chance, I'll tell you about. But what I've come to understand is that in the seeds of creation, there is also the seeds of destruction and illness and struggle and all of those things. And it's not just that it cannot be avoided, Robert, it's that it's baked into the fabric of the Hindu universe. It's baked into the cycle. It not only cannot be avoided, it's part of it. One must accept the destruction if one wishes to have the creation part of the whole equation.
Yeah, I think on more sciencey, thermodynamics, entropy, the law of entropy, we are all decaying once we are existing. So I think both can live there. I think the acceptance part is huge, and understanding that that there is that element, and there is that element that can pull me one way. It's just interesting. There could be a statement, a news line, or and we could look at it, and we could look at it both negatively or positively, no matter what the statement says. It's interesting how our minds can convince us depending on how we are viewing or framing that narrative in our minds and how it affects us. One more question, and then we'll get to just updating how you're doing and everything. Um, it's kind of a follow-up question. Why are we willing to fight for the image the world sees us and not how we see us? I forgot. So it's, I think and this is my short commentary. I think social media distracts us so much. Like I feel it's the way we communicate or not communicate. I think this just seems more visible. Like we are more constantly obsessed about how we are viewed outside. Certain cultures are more so than others. I'm half Korean, so I know that part, and it's sad. Like Korea is pretty high up there with suicides because of just how a lot of the family obligations are really just written in stone. They go through it like systematically, but there's no real substance to it. So I don't know. What is your take on this? Our willingness to just fight for everyone else, but not ourselves. Like the fight for how other people see us, but not being really comfortable to kind of be honest with ourselves about how we see us. How we see us in the mirror, because it never feels like it's ever fed enough. Even if we get somewhere where people may like what we're doing for a moment, it's never enough in that regard. If that makes sense. I don't know. Your thoughts?
Well, this is a shifting of the conversation to the other great force that defines the suicide matrix. So we began by talking about the tension within the individual, and we can use Freud, we could use Jung, we could use IFS to look at the different parts within the person and the tension that exists within that individual. But there is also a tension between people. The two books that I think best define this is, there's Emil Durkheim's great work on suicide, where he basically says that all suicide is a result of a profound sense of alienation that someone feels from their tribe or from their community. That if you feel completely alienated, rejected by the society from which you come, suicide is the inevitable outcome. And then a refinement of that is Thomas Joyner's book, why. The title of the book escapes me, but I think it's Why People Kill Themselves or something like that, where he talks about three massive forces within the individual. But three massive forces. Two of them relates to the forces within intra individual forces, but one of them he echoes Durkheim, where he says of the three major things that cause people to decide to do away with themselves, one of them is to do with alienation as well. So I think the reason why we're so willing, or it's so necessary for us to fight for the image that the world sees, is that there is a terrible fear, a terror, in fact, of this alienation, of being completely separate from the tribe, and that we will fight tooth and nail to prevent that profound sense of alienation and disconnection and disempowerment from happening. And that sometimes we will do this at the expense of the forces inside of us. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
No, you are. I'm just curious. Do you think is that what you're describing? Do you think that has shifted given like how we communicate now? Like, granted, like if we're talking about before cell phones, before this, like we're talking 90s, 80s, the same model. Do you think it has been affected more with the advancements in technology and how we are connecting, or do you think it's about the same as it's just the underbelly that's just still constant? I don't know if that makes sense.
I get asked this all the time, Robert, whether I think social media has fundamentally shifted this matrix, right? This profound sense of alienation. First of all, I have to caveat the whole discussion by saying I'm not a user of social media myself, so I don't have that when people say to me that they put a post on Instagram that doesn't get any likes, and how it's
Or yeah.
something I don't have a personal experience of that. I just think it's completely, there's no problem with that for me, but I can see enough to know that it's a very, very big problem, certainly for those amongst us who are younger. I mean, I'm in my mid-50s. I'm talking about people in their 20s and in their 30s that I interact with on a regular basis. I can see how for them that is a profound sense of connectedness. And that to not have that, certainly a lot of the bullying that we're seeing in schools, my friends who are school counselors and school therapists tell me that most of the bullying today is done online. The days of being accosted in the corner or being punched in the nose, rather as I was when I was a kid, that those days are sort of past us. Most of this stuff happens online. And certainly it's bad enough to drive children everywhere to suicidality, and very tragically to completed suicides as well. So there must be something in it. That's as far as I can say, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and that's I find I find that we're still learning on what the impact is slowly. It's kind of like we have medical marijuana here, like obviously in the States, and but the problem with that is not really medical marijuana, it's just the weak policies behind it. There's not the weak regulation on each of the states. So sometimes we put the cart before the horse, per se. Like I'm not one to be on any side on that, but I feel that's the same thing with social media. I think in the beginning they're like, oh, it's gonna be great, we're gonna connect more. And there's elements that are suggesting not so much, especially for the young people like you're describing. They don't have any other basis, and a lot of the bullying, like you said, is online. So it's like when I had a bully when I was young, I was done after I got out of school and went home, and constantly creep up. So I do feel that, but it's attention spans. When's the last time people read a book and just enjoy the book, just front to back, I find that has deteriorated, whether that's social media or just too much saturation of entertainment. But it's just our attention spans are shortening to kind of do or focus on task. I just find that that's what I've seen trending, but I don't know how what measurement, but I just feel when I was growing up, reading a 300-400 page book was just a normal book. Now it's like there's too much cliff notes. People are just skipping ahead. They're not reading through, and the emergence of AI, and they're doing all this stuff. It's just kind of concerning about how much we're, if you don't use it, you lose it, kind of thing when it comes to your cognitive functioning. So that does kind of worry me a little bit in regards to just the whole connection aspect of this, if that makes sense. But
very much with you on that, Robert. And I'll say this much for myself: the best thinking that I do are the moments that in my day where I'm forced to stop. So the hour that I spend in the gym, where I leave the phone to one side, where I'm not on call to anyone, where I don't answer emails, and I'm in the gym, and I, between sets of lifts or whatever it is that I'm doing, it just forces me to stop and to be inside of my head. That's where I do my best thinking, sitting on buses, sitting on trains, sitting on airplanes, where for whatever reason, you can't, or you can, but I don't, but I just sit there. That's where there is something about purposefully slowing down in that way that allows ideas to come and to marinate, and the thinking becomes very clear. It becomes very difficult to do. The true creative process, when I look at the books that I've written, when I look at the great insights that I've had in writing my manuals, including the one that I currently am doing, all of those, when people ask me, how did you see, it in this particular way? The answer that I give them, and I know they're very dissatisfied with it, is I mean, you can call it meditation if you like, because I think it's a fancy word, but it's daydreaming. It's
Mm-hmm.
stopping and just thinking and just conjugating and
Yeah.
reflecting and just, it's almost like a kind of like a daydreaming type thing.
Yeah.
I think it's got a very bad rep because people think it's like it's dissociation or something. It's not. My best ideas come to me when I'm sitting on a train somewhere, I have to say, staring out the window.
I think part of that is also problem solving is creative in nature, and I do think about Albert Einstein saying that I'm paraphrasing, but he's like, people say similarly, how did you get these ideas? And he said, I just stayed with the problem longer. I just stayed with the problem longer, and I think I got better at communicating by being more comfortable being uncomfortable. It's just quite, and like in having those things, I feel it's just like if you want to go back, you mentioned the gym, expect it's going to be rough if you haven't gone to the gym. Understand and be kind to yourself that it will be rough for a little bit, and you'll build on it. It's are you and I think that has improved my communication, slowing down, but also being willing to be uncomfortable a little bit, because it's going to be uncomfortable sometimes. I want to pause on it. I know we talked, and it's been really great, but I'd like to give the moment any updates, anything you want to share with us, and then we'll wrap things up.
The last time I spoke to you, I was living and working in Australia. I was a clinical director of a small rehab there. So I finished with that, and I'm back in my native Singapore. And I'm in the process of a little bit of a relaunch, if you like. So the therapy services that I've offered for many years is still ongoing, but I have a bunch of new colleagues that are joining me. Very exciting. Each of whom brings a special set of skills that I don't possess. But in addition to that, one of the things that I'm also expanding, one of the things that I learned about myself in Australia is that I am now able to teach the method that I've developed over the last 10 years, where in my previous job as a clinical director, I tried to teach it to the people that I was training back then and met with total failure. I realize now that I just didn't know it well enough to be able to teach it. Again, another quote from Einstein: if you can't explain something simply, then you yourself don't understand it. Yeah. And that was definitely the case in 2018 when I previously tried to teach the system. I just didn't understand it well enough. The difference that I discovered in 2024 and 2025 is that I am now able to communicate this in a way that people are able to, because it's quite a complex system. I haven't reinvented the wheel. It's utilizing the best of behavioral psychology, cognitive, somatic, environmental, social, exposure-based therapies. It's a combination of all of these things, but it's assembled in a very peculiar and particular way. And I've written the latest version of my manual. And again, since we're quoting Einstein, I'll go back to him. Everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. So it's trying to make the manual as simple as possible.
Yeah.
But keeping the essence of it. So it's a very exciting and tantalizing time. We're going to be offering training webinars as well. One that is very, very low cost. It'll be about $100 US, and anyone can jump. It's a 3-hour seminar, 3-hour webinar on a Saturday, so very low barrier to entry. Most people, I think, can afford that. And then there'll be a much, much higher barrier to entry, kind of a real training seminar for people who really want to learn the method. So that's something that we're going to be doing as well. And finally, this is just me personally. I've now been a part of and helped to set up and train people in 2 different rehabs. And so if anyone out there is interested in engaging myself or my team in writing them a clinical program that's trauma-based, which is what I do for a facility anywhere in the world, that's another service that we're offering as well. So yeah, it's an exciting and a tantalizing
Yeah.
time for me.
Yeah. So those who are listening, all the details on that will be in the notes, so you can check it out. I encourage you to do so. As we wrap up, I'm just gonna, we talked a lot all over the place. And I love that about you, Reshie. It just goes all over the place, and I just like that. But since it's World Suicide Day, just it passed. But I do want to ask you this: creating hope through action, just because it's timely. This is their theme. How does hope become an action? And then your final thoughts as we wrap. I don't know if that makes sense.
All over the place is my middle name, I think. Creating hope through action. I've often used the phrase with my clients and also with myself, where the body goes, the mind will follow.
Mhm.
And it's a little bit of an inversion of how people often think, or certainly this is how we were taught it in medical school, when you were asked to write an essay on how the human being creates a fist, right? It's a very famous question you get asked in to describe the anatomical, physiological, and biochemical processes. And the essay always begins with, there is a cognition, and then how that translates into a recruitment of the central nervous system, and then arms, muscles, joints, all of that stuff, and then you make a fist, and so on and so forth. I've completely inverted that. I say it's the other way around. I say the body moves first, and then the mind will go there. And so if you want to create hope, move. So for example, if you're hopeful at improving your health, if you're hopeful at becoming fitter, if you're hopeful to lose weight or whatever, just move. Just move. Just get the body moving. The mind, the hope will come with it. So it's a slightly inverted way of looking at the hope matrix, if you like.
Yeah, and I think when I think about this, how does hope become an action? I feel a lot of times the obvious thing is I feel more on the surface. I think for me, I'm a big component of different parts when I think of the holistic picture, but I think having those uncomfortable conversations can be that action when it comes to creating hope. So those impossible conversations that one may say, "Oh, that will never work," or I remember several times when we become a barrier to our own selves. We kind of predict, "Oh, this will not work," so I might as well not try. I would just suggest breaking it up to little pieces to get there, because I feel one area, and not saying the entire area, that create hope through action is being intentional in having those uncomfortable conversations that matter. A lot of times when I was a leader in church in the past, I felt I was disenchanted because I don't feel people have earned the conversations they want quickly. I think you have to earn them. I think you have to earn them by being intentional. And I think some of the barriers are those relational parts. Obviously, there's other parts to the whole idea of hope when we're talking about suicide. But if someone feels heard, a lot of times they do feel better. And it's not like their whole life is better, but it does feel a little bit better because they don't feel alone at that point. They felt something. So that's how I would answer that myself. But final thoughts as we wrap up. Thank you so much, Reshie, for coming on.
It's always a pleasure speaking to you, and the time always gets away. I always have so much fun. We just go from one subject to the next. There's a real flow to it. My final thoughts is that this is something that you said there, which just struck me. I thought was said very beautifully. Earning the conversation through intentionality. Right? That's something that would be my final thought, something worth reflecting on.
Yeah. I think I'll say this way, and it's kind of funny. Father be at work and just have this art piece that's just gross. It doesn't look really put together right, and Person's like, what's that art? Why do you have that on your desk? Because my granddaughter made it for me. It is the best art piece ever. Like, it's not really great symmetrically. It's probably going to fall apart any second now. However, it's what's behind it that matters. So if we get to the core, like derivative of why we even care about any of this stuff, it's always about the people. It's always about people. It's all about the people. You may not experience mental health. You may not have any touch of substance use. That's great. But you may have someone you know or care about who does. Someone who is struggling. And that's why this is important. Sometimes we kind of get too heady, too rational in our thoughts of why this shouldn't happen. But it is. And I think if we remember why it's important, that will be my final thought.
Well said, Robert. Well said.
I just want to say thank you so much for coming on, and just remember to always stay updated with Revive Ministries to ReviveMinistriesFL.com. This is a goodbye from Revive Ministries, leaving this last quote. It is from an unknown, actually. It says, "It isn't weak to ask for help. It's like using a flashlight when you're lost in the dark." You know. So there you go. Thank you so much, Reshie, for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Robert. Pleasure, as always.
No problem.